Welcome everybody, welcome back to those who were in the meeting yesterday, and welcome to those who are joining us for the first time today to this, the 2022 meeting of the GRA Livestock Group. I'm Richard Dewhurst and I'm one of the co-chairs of the Livestock Group, and I'll be chairing quite a bit of the session this evening. Wanted to start out by summarizing some of the exciting things that we were talking about yesterday. We had a great keynote talk from Andy Reisinger about methane metrics, and we also had a very stimulating session on the scientific challenges for organizations responding to climate change. And some of the key points that I took from that session were that we need to be careful about the choice of metrics and think carefully about the metric that you're using is telling you what you need to know, and that has huge implications for the policy decisions that you're going to base those that information on. We were reminded that livestock are just part of a complex global food system that impacts on health and livelihoods and much more widely. So we need to think very carefully about the global food system. For example, it was raised that countries taking individual separate decisions about their greenhouse gas reductions policies and indeed about their food security, doing that individually may not give us the best solutions globally. We also were reminded both from the beef and the dairy sectors that a large proportion of greenhouse gas emissions from livestock come from livestock in developing countries, low and middle income countries, where there are lots of emissions, but also big opportunities to mitigate, particularly through things that are well known, like improvements in feed quality and animal health improvements. And that would have big associated benefits for the populations in those areas. But there are also large constraints to implementing and moving towards exploiting some of that mitigation potential, particularly the availability of funding. In our presentation from our Maori colleague, we were reminded of the need to care for the land, the water, the people, and indeed the next generation, taking a holistic approach to the way that we think about our farming systems, not just a very narrow focus. The last big topic that I took from the presentations yesterday was the need for better access to data, particularly in the area of carbon sequestration. And that is something that chimes with our first presentation today. We have a keynote presentation from Professor Richard Tiffin of the Agrimetrics and the University of Reading, who's going to speak to us about data and bringing big data sets together, really topical issue. Richard is the Chief Scientific Officer of Agrimetrics, which is the UK's Agritech Centre operating in the data area. He's also a Professor of Applied Economics at the University of Reading, and he co-led the funding application that led to the establishment of this Agrimetrics. I'm sure he'll say more about Agrimetrics, the way that it connects research science and its applications and uses big data. So I'll pass over to Richard.
Richard, thank you. I'm just getting my slides up onto the screen.
That's going through nicely.
Hopefully that's now visible. Okay.
That's great.
Great. Well, thanks very much for the introduction, Richard, and thanks everyone for the opportunity of coming to talk to you today. I won't say very much about agrimetrics. What I want to do really today is to talk in some more practical terms about the topic I was given, which was the challenges in bringing together big data sets from multiple different sources. The reason why Richard, I guess, asked me to come and do this under an agrimetrics umbrella is that this is what we've been spending quite a lot of the the time and money that we won from the UK government in trying to figure out is how we address this challenge in an industry which is somewhat unique, really, and in the level of fragmentation that there is in the agricultural industry. Fragmented industry in terms of the businesses, which leads to fragmentation in terms of the data, and as a result of the fragmentation of the data, it's one of the reasons, I think, why the sector tends to lag behind some other sectors in terms of its digitalization and its adoption of modern data science in the form of AI and machine learning algorithms. But as I say, what I really want to do today is just run through some of the challenges that there are in big data, in bringing big data sets together, because I understand that's something that is confronting your community, and so hopefully it will provide something useful for you to chew over and think about. And I've subtitled the talk Knowledge Graph 101. Knowledge graphs are a thing that, or is a term that is becoming more and more prevalent. It describes the coalescence of a number of different technologies, which are fundamentally about bringing together data sets and the knowledge that is necessary in order for machines, computers to understand and interpret and use those data sets effectively with the minimum of human intervention. So I have to change my, there we go, good. So let's start with a look at some traditional data. One of the projects that we worked on was a European project called Smart Cow. I guess there may be some people that participated in the audience, and so we were presented with a number of different data sets in that project, and I just picked a couple of those at random. And you know, this is a very traditional way of presenting data. It's in spreadsheets. The spreadsheet on the right, you can see, has got some quite comprehensive metadata that's associated with it. It's written in German, so I say it's comprehensive. I don't speak German. I presume that it's comprehensive. But if we were as a third party came to these data sets along with a load of other data sets and tried to think about how we might lump these data sets together to create a unified, a single data set, you can immediately see there are some challenges that are associated with doing that. So you can see one of the keys in the data set is the animal number, and you can see animal 3955 is appearing in both data sets, or at least there is an animal which is identified with the number 3955. And one might assume that they're the same animal, but can we be absolutely certain that those two are the same animal? Something else you might notice is that we've got in the left-hand spreadsheet, you can see each of the animals is recorded for its milk yield, and each of them is milked twice a day. Now, it may be that we come across another data set which has got data on yields and milks, and actually those cows are milked 3 times a day. And so we've immediately got a challenge of formatting of the data sets. So that the format of this data set is designed to accommodate 2 milkings a day. How do we suddenly change without disturbing the way in which the data is arranged to add that third data set? There's lots of great metadata, but essentially that metadata is readable by humans. So if we're going to understand and use that data set, a human has to come and look at that metadata at the top of the spreadsheet there, read it, interpret it, and decide what their actions are going to be as a result of reading and interpreting that data. And really, when we're confronted with, it's all right if you've only got one data set, but if you had hundreds and you were trying to bring together hundreds of different data sets, being able to read that data using a machine rather than having to have a human do it would be advantageous. So what I want to do is start by introducing a different way of at least conceptualizing data or representing the data. Doesn't necessarily mean that we have to change the way in which data has been gathered. We can still keep it in the original sort of tabular data sets that we've just been looking at. But if we can conceptualize it slightly differently using a non-tabular representation, and here what I'm doing here is representing the non-tabular data with a graph. So we have nodes that describe features, and we have edges that describe the relationships between those features. So we can see that this graph that we've put together here codifies some of that data that that we had on one of those previous tables. You can see we've got cow 3955. I've made an assumption that that's a cow. You know, it might be obvious to somebody who created that data set, but as a reader of that, I made an assumption that it was a cow, and we'll come back to that in a moment. And you can see the readings of that cow in terms of its protein, its lactose content, and its yield recorded against that cow. Now you can see the advantage of that, because without having to disturb the way in which we presented that data, we can just add another edge and another node onto that to cope with the fact that perhaps in a different data set, the animal is being milked 3 times a day and not just 2 times a day. We don't have to reconfigure the whole of the spreadsheet. We can just add into the spreadsheet in exactly the same kind of structure using a node and an edge without disrupting what we've got in the original data. And what we can also do is add a unique identifier to this to allow us to indicate that this cow 395 is actually a specific entity. And it could be that we can then link that same identifier to the other 3955 in the other spreadsheet to indicate that the two of them are the same cow. And what we've done here is we've used something that will probably be familiar to people as a URL. We call them URIs because this doesn't necessarily describe a location, it only describes an identifier. But what we've done is we've added an authority. In this case, it's Agrimetrics, my company is the authority here. And that authority has given a unique identifier to that cow. And so because we've got confidence in that authority, giving it a unique identifier, if we found that identifier associated with another ID, it could be 3955 in another data set, or it could be a different ID in a different data set. If it's linked to that identifier, then we can have confidence that we're talking about the same thing. So we can add in these additional pieces of information that allow us to link between different bits of the data to make that work effectively. And this should be what's called dereferenceable. So I should be able to click on that ID and it should take me to a unique location on the internet that allows me to have that confidence that this is talking about a similar, exactly the same animal. And in that location, it could be that it just says, this is cow reference number XYYZF, but we could put some more information in there, some textual description of what that cow is. It may be, you know, you write a short sentence to say that this was a cow that was located at a particular location and so on, just to make it a bit human readable and to give confidence again that you're talking about the same animal. So shifting to that graph representation of the data is useful in giving flexibility and allowing linkages to be made between different data sets in a reasonably straightforward way. So this now is a real data set. So what we can see here is we've got cows, and we've got identifiers that are associated with those cows. There's some 20 cows that are associated with those cows. And if I just run this video, you can see how that allows us to expand data out from each of those individuals. So if I look at that cow number there, that individual, I can expand that node out and I can see that there are observations recorded against that cow. And if I look at one of those particular observations, I can expand that out and I can see that that observation is about the weight of the animal and some other information about the status of the animal at its observation. We should be able to expand this a bit further, but because the software that I'm using is a little bit limited, we can't go further. But it gives you the idea that, you know, in this database we're now representing things using these nodes and edges, and it gives that opportunity to add and cross-reference in useful and valuable ways. But just to give you a bit more confidence that we're not asking you to do anything, that's a totally new way of looking at data and thinking about it. You wouldn't explore and analyze data using that kind of visual tool. It was just there to give you an impression of the way in which we've structured the data. We can pull data out of that database, having put it into that format in very familiar ways. So don't worry about the code that's written at the top here particularly, but what that code is doing, it's called Sparkle. It's a query language that's querying the data. And you can see what I've done is pulled out all of the observations on the weight and the units of that animal together with the dates on which the animals were weighed. You can see the first animal was weighed on the 7th of January 2014, and it has that weight. Second animal, I think there's 2 observations on that one. And so this is, just because we're storing and conceptualizing the data in a slightly different way doesn't mean to say that we've got unfamiliar, we necessarily have to look at and analyze the data in those unfamiliar ways. The right-hand side there was just put there to just in case it was too small on people's screens to see it in the original format. And we can change the viewpoint. So we can write the query slightly differently. So here's a query that actually says, okay, give me all of the observations that were made on a particular date. So the date is the 17th of April 2014. Show me all of the observations that you can find in this combined data set for all of those for that particular date. So you can see that there are some observations on gas emissions, on digestibility, and you can see the animal reference that those observations were made on. So just to show you that you can take different views on the data quite straightforwardly out of this combined data set. You're not restricted to having data in the original tabular format that you provided. You can easily readjust the view that you've got. So you've got an additional level of flexibility on the data as a result of that. So that's the first challenge, is making your data sets more adaptable and easy to combine by looking at them slightly differently. The other challenge that you have when you bring together data sets is the need to have some form of harmonization between those data sets. So that really works at 2 levels. The first level is we need to provide a description of the things that are generating the data, the relationships between them and their properties. So fundamentally, the main things that are generating the data in the data sets that we've been looking at are cows. So we need to provide a description of the cow so that we know that what we're doing is talking about observations that are made on that thing that is familiar to all of us but may not be familiar to a machine, which is called a cow. But we could also think about instruments that are being used to actually measure the relationships as being another type of thing that's being used in generating the data. And importantly, we need to describe the relationships between them and the properties. So that's what we saw at the very start when I was giving you the simplistic graphs. We had the cow in the center, we had an observation, and you saw that each of those edges that joined the nodes had a description on them. So we're describing the properties by labeling those edges. And the second area where you have to provide some harmonization is in the language that is used to describe the things. And I've put in brackets there that we don't aim to standardize. So one of the things that is often, you'll often hear people talking about is, oh, we've got to make the language standard that we use to describe things. Well, the problem with that is that you'll spend most of the time that you've got available to you to bring data together actually trying to agree on what the common language is. It's much better to unify and harmonize rather than to attempt to standardize it. So let's just make that what's happening there a little bit clearer. So first of all, we need to do the harmonization on things. So I'm going to create a new thing, which is an entity which I'm going to call a cow. And in the language that we use in knowledge graphs, we call this a class. Now, everybody in this audience knows exactly what I mean when I label something as being a cow. It's an example of things that we see walking around in fields and that we milk and so on and so forth. Now, a computer doesn't necessarily think like that. If you just saw a thing labeled as a cow as a computer, you'd be scratching your head saying, I don't understand. If computers have heads, that you'd be trying to figure out what exactly that was. So what do we do as humans when we try to understand what a cow is? Well, you do what I just did. You say that a cow is a thing that wanders around in a field, and it gives milk, and so you're describing properties of that cow to actually define what the cow actually is. And so it's all very well to label something as being a cow. We actually need to describe relationships so that we can be clear what that actually means. And one simple relationship is to say, actually, this is an example of something that we know of a mammal. A cow is a subclass of a mammal, and that allows us to introduce another thing into the description of things, which is a goat, which is also a subclass of a mammal. And what this does is it allows us to do a number of things. First of all, it removes the ambiguity about whether the thing that we're talking about is a cow, because we can relate our cow to the thing, the cow. So here's our cow 3955, which we saw earlier. And we've now put an extra edge into our knowledge graph to say that this is a thing which we have defined as a cow. And then we can also bring in something that's also got an identifier called cow 74. And you might have thought that was a cow because it's got that identifier, but actually the graph is telling us that we're actually saying that that's a goat. So we've removed that ambiguity about whether the thing that we're talking about is actually a cow, because we've made a concrete definition of that to be the case. The second thing that it gives us is it allows us to define general characteristics at the level of the mammal. So these things, goats and cows, share characteristics as a virtue of the fact that they're a mammal. They all lactate, which is why we're interested in them as farm animals. And so we can define a bunch of characteristics at this level and allow each of these things to inherit those things as a result of being mammals themselves. So it simplifies the process of creating this kind of harmonization schema, because we only need to worry about what are called the superclasses, because the properties of these superclasses will be inherited down here. And the third thing that it gives us is it gives us an additional search capability for free. So imagine that we had a knowledge graph that had added things like cows to it, but we'd also got another research scientist that had added some things about goats to it. And actually, because we know that goats and cows are connected as a virtue of the fact that they're both mammals, we can now do another search and say, actually, tell me about the yield of all mammals within the data set, as opposed to just restricting ourselves to thinking about the yields of just the cows or the goats. So we get a lot of extra information as a result of this additional it's essentially metadata that we're adding to the data set. And this is where the knowledge part of the knowledge graph comes in. What we're doing here in this schema at the top here is encoding knowledge about the things that are in the data set. And so then turning to the harmonization of the properties, we can, for each of those classes, mammals, cows, and goats that were in the previous diagram, we can say things about what we expect the properties of those things to have. So we know that a mammal has milk yields, and we know that in the data sets we were looking previously, they had 2 yields because they were being milked twice a day. They have a protein content, they have a lactose content, and they have a fat content. And those things can be inherited by cows and goats, as I say. And then there may be some other things that are only common to a cow and you'd never find for a goat. And I was scratching my head to think about what this might be. And the only thing I could think of right off the top of my head was this thing called the BCMS ID. So in the UK, we have this thing called the British Cattle Movement Survey. Goats don't, and it has an ID as a result of that, to enter into that survey. it's a cattle movement survey, so goats don't have those IDs. So just because you're inheriting some properties from the superclass doesn't stop you adding some additional properties down at the subclass level. And then harmonization in terms of language. So all of these domesticated species have breeds. We may, in our data sets, want to add an annotation to say what the breed of those of that cow is. Now, the list of breeds is finite. It might be very long, but it's definitely a finite list. But there's then another much longer list of the names that are used for that to describe those breeds, and different scientists may use different names within their data sets to describe the breed. And obviously that, if you come to that without understanding, as a machine or as a naive economist trying to do the harmonization of these data sets, if you don't know the relationship between the words that are used to describe breeds and all sorts of other things, then you would mistakenly potentially classify two animals that are of the same breed as being of different breeds. So the solution to this is, and this is an example that's taken from AgriVoc, which is a really comprehensive annotation or listing, description, vocabulary of the words that are used to describe resources that are used in agriculture. It's an FAO initiative, and in that they have a limited number of cattle breeds that are annotated, and so I've never heard of the cattle breed called the Anatolian Black, but it tells you in here that it's an animal that's used in Turkey for both meat and milk. You can see that it's given some terminology, some names in different languages. There's some additional information about relationships between this breed and other things in the AgriVoc. But crucially, you can see down here that there's another one of these URIs. So when you're bringing together your data sets, you unite them around this URI to show that in one data set where it's called an Anatolian Black and in another data set where it's called a yearly Cara, they're actually referring to the same thing. So that's a very quick whistle-stop tour through some of the challenges and some of the approaches to addressing those challenges. To summarize what my message to you would be, it's very simple. First of all, if you're trying to bring together lots of different data sets from all sorts of different scientists to create a resource that is useful to a much wider community, first of all, don't attempt to re-engineer existing data sets into a bigger version of the same thing. Use some of these alternative representations, graphs being one of them, as a method for conceptualizing what that data is and giving you a framework from which you can map the original data to give you linkages, and then be flexible and adopt extendable approaches to, first of all, representing and organizing that data. So the graph is a very good example of how something can be flexible and extendable, and also adopt this same kind of a philosophy, flexible and extendable approaches to both harmonizing and not standardizing the data and language that you use. And I thought I'd better put at least one picture of some livestock in the presentation, just to show that there are some livestock involved in some of this. It's not just all about data. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you very much, Richard, for that. Two things I should have said at the start. One is we'll be using the Q&A box, so if any of the participants in the meeting have questions, they can put them into the chat, as Suzanne just has, so I can relay those questions. I think the other bit of context that I should have given at the start of the meeting is that many of our networks are groupings that have quite large data sets. So, for example, around methane emissions, around nitrogen partitioning. There's obviously the Data Man Mel's database around manure emissions, and in the microbiology area, I guess all of the kind of omics related, so rumen taxa, genes, metabolites, all of that stuff. I suppose in the omics area, there are some better established, more systematic ways of doing things in terms of the databases for genes and microbes and genomes and all of that. The stuff that relates to DNA, RNA, protein, but a lot of the data sets are relating to animals and manures. And we had these ideas that maybe some of these things should be being brought together. So that's really helpful to have that perspective of how we set things out, that these seemingly disparate things could eventually be brought together. It's a question, we haven't got a long time for questioning, but if there are any questions, Suzanne has asked, is there a way to link the URI to data access permissions?
Absolutely, yes. So in theory, it's possible to put a permissions matrix on every one of those nodes that there is in your knowledge graph. And now, I say in theory, I'm the data guy, or at best and probably at worst an economist, and my developers absolutely hate it when I say things like, "Oh yeah, you can do that," because there are some challenges in doing it. But in theory, yes, you can permission at the level of the individual nodes. In reality, we haven't got that far in what we're doing. So what we do is we collect groups of data together into, if you like, subgraphs of the whole big graph, and we apply the permissioning at the levels of the individual subgraphs within the data set. So it's a challenge that we're, I'm not surprised that was one of the questions. It's a challenge that we're confronted with a lot of the time, and it's one that we're wrestling with very, very much so, and really wanting to get down way, but I mean, permissioning traditionally is at the level of the data set. We really want to get way down below permissioning at the level of the data set to permissioning in traditional tabular data at the level of the row or the column, but ultimately at the level of an individual cell within the database. And it is possible to do it with the graph, but it's not without its challenges.
Okay, well, there are no more questions in the Q&A. So with that, I'll thank Richard for that presentation, and we'll move on to the next part of the session. Thank you very much. So now I'll invite Tim and Majaliwa and Suniro to switch on their cameras and unmute themselves. We're now going to have a discussion with some of the partner organizations. You'll remember, if you were in the sessions yesterday, we indicated that GRA partners with more than 20 different international organizations around the world. It's important in terms of connecting people up and linking people together, and trying to be efficient in the way that we work. So, yep, there's Suniro, and we got Tim. Tim is there. And Majaliwa, if you turn on your camera and microphone.
The microphone is possible, but I have a problem with my camera now.
Oh, okay, we've got your microphone. That's good. So what the way that we have about 40 minutes for this discussion. The way I'd like to run it is to start out by allowing each of you to introduce yourselves and introduce your organization, and perhaps to say something about one or perhaps more of the key initiatives that your organization has going in the livestock greenhouse gas area. just as a precursor to a discussion about how we can work better together, and just to think about collaboration, working together between organizations, with the GRA and with other organizations. But if we just start out singly and say something about your organization, yourself and your organization. And I think Tim is going to share some slides. So we'll start with Tim and then move around to Suniro and then Majaliwa.
Can you see those slides, Richard?
That's great. Thank you, Tim. Yep, looking good.
Okay, thanks. Hello, everybody, and thanks again. Thanks very much for this opportunity to speak with you. I'll try and move through these slides fairly quickly because in the interest of time. So my name's Tim Robinson. I'm Senior Livestock Policy Officer responsible for climate and natural resource use with the Food and Agriculture Organisation. So I sit in the Animal Production and Health Division, and I'm currently leading the Livestock Information Sector Analysis and Policy branch. And that is the branch within FAO that houses the technical side of the livestock emissions. We do also have slides moving. We also have another group, which is the Office for Climate Change and Biodiversity, and they deal with more kind of corporate issues around livestock and environment, such as developing this strategy on climate change. They would be the negotiators with the COP, for example. They deal with more that side of things. And I deal much more with simply technical matters to do with estimating emissions and stuff like that. So our relatively recently developed strategy on climate change is about supporting countries to integrate climate change in their national programs. Also includes NDC implementation, convening intersectorial dialogues on climate change. So we're involved in the Coronavia joint work on agriculture, for example, sharing knowledge and capacity building, and facilitating countries in accessing climate finance. So those are the sorts of things that are mentioned within the strategy. And what we do at FAO, we work in 4 main areas in support of climate action. Developing tools and metrics. So we have our global livestock environmental assessment model, GLEAM, which many people are aware of. And also people tend to be familiar with the LEAP partnership, the Livestock Environmental Assessment Performance Partnership, which comes up with metrics and guidelines through a multi-stakeholder process. We strengthen the knowledge and evidence base by doing sectorial analysis using our GLEAM model. Systems, production system mapping, food system mapping, policy and economic analysis of these sorts of things. We run various projects to pilot and validate technical and policy options. So projects, for example, in collaboration with the Climate and Clean Air Coalition, GEF, World Bank, Pathways to Dairy Net Zero. And also under that sort of project umbrella, we do capacity building work. And then a fourth sort of area where we work is in convening of intergovernmental and multi-stakeholder partnerships. And the FAO Committee on Agriculture, the recently developed subcommittee for livestock, is an example of an intergovernmental body for negotiation. And the Global Agenda for Sustainable Livestock is an example of a multi-stakeholder partnership that's housed by FAO. Specific collaboration with GRA, we are working under CCAC funding with NZ Agric and a number of countries, looking at specifically methane because of the CCAC involvement. So we're supporting NDC implementation and greenhouse gas inventory in a number of countries in the most recent phase of that project. Supporting the development of country-based tools, developing of country-specific emission factors, and we're developing e-learning materials on livestock and climate change as part of that. Briefly to mention the capacity building work, we're creating a whole blended e-learning course as part of a CCAC project. And these are the sorts of modules that we have in that course. I won't go into details, but there are modules specific to inventories, reporting, understanding how Glean works, also looking at adaptation, how to access climate finance, these sorts of things. It's a very modular course. A lot of the work that we do really is based around the GLEAN model, the Global Livestock Environmental Assessment model, which has been evolving over the last 15 years or so. Pre-GLEAN was the calculations that led to the publication of Livestock's Long Shadow in 2006. And we've been through various versions, and we have just released through a dashboard our current version of GLEAN, which is an estimate for the 2015 base year. And these data are now published through a dashboard, which makes them accessible to people at a regional level. And if I show that, and we're going to have a publication that provides a summary of all of these data, a reference point for them, that we hope to have published in time for the COP. That's an example of the dashboard, a global view of all livestock emissions. 6.23 gigatons is our current best estimate of emissions, taking a life cycle assessment. That brings it to, that accounts for about just over 11% of global anthropogenic emissions. So that's our current best estimate for 2015 data. And this dashboard is nice. It enables, there are lots of graphic interfaces. And so we can see on the left-hand side of this particular view, we can see the different species. And on the right-hand side, we can see the different gases that are produced and how those map to the species through what's called a Sankey diagram. And we can add intermediate nodes into that diagram to look at different production systems, different commodities, and so on and so forth. So that's the GLEAN model with our GLEAN dashboard. And you can see, you can all take note of the URL there to access the dashboard and explore it for yourselves. So that's the dashboard. I think priority areas for collaboration in the future with GRA and particularly the Livestock Research Group. Support to the methane pledge. We have a LEAP report coming out on methane metrics, which many people here will have contributed to, in fact, and policy analysis and some focus countries. So I think the methane pledge is an important area for potential collaboration. We're already working very closely, I think, in the Pathways to Dairy Net Zero program, supporting a scoping study, which we're working with GRA on, looking at typologies for dairy systems, revised assessment, looking at projections under different scenarios, looking at greenhouse gas mitigation potential of different interventions in different pathways, and supporting the development of funding proposals. For example, the Green Climate Fund, we're working together to get a proposal in for East Africa to the Green Climate Fund, which will provide some very substantial funding to mitigate greenhouse gas emissions from dairy systems, whilst at the same time supporting other development objectives in those areas. And I think there's enormous potential to collaborate in further development of GLEAN and the implementation of that. And I think the peer review of the methods we used in GLEAN would be a good area of collaboration. We'd like to see it become a reference centre for agricultural greenhouse gas emissions, and I think we could usefully work on joint publications and policy documents and assessments and so on. So thanks very much, Richard. I hope that wasn't too long. That's an overview of our collaboration with the Livestock Research Group.
Great, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Tim. Do you unshare your screen? Is that?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's great. Well, thank you very much for that. I noticed there's a question in the Q&A. But the way we're going to run this, I'll give each of the participants a chance to say something about their organisation and their activities, and then we're going to have a discussion about the challenges of working together, opportunities to work together. Also, if there's anything around data, which is an important topic for this meeting, and if there's anything relevant for each of these organisations in the discussions we're having yesterday about the challenges for global organisations and entities in responding to the challenges. So some of the things that were picked up yesterday. So I'm going to invite now Suniro to put your camera on and just say a little bit about yourself and your organisation and activities from CGIAR.
Sure. Can you hear me okay, Richard?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Hello, everyone. Good day. So first, thanks, Richard, and thanks for the organizing committee for this invitation. It's a pleasure to be here. As Richard said, my name is Suniro Costa Jr. I'm a climate and food systems specialist with the Alliance of Biodiversity International and CIAT. Which is part of the CGIAR, a global agricultural research organization. So the CG is basically composed of 15 research institutions, presence in almost 100 countries, a network of about 8,000 researchers and scientists, and a turnover of more than $1 billion a year. And the CGIAR, of course, has several projects and initiatives related to livestock, including livestock mitigation. Right? And a number of these projects are related to the livestock and climate initiative of the One CGIAR structure. And this initiative is basically focused on working with public and private actors to adapt livestock agri-food systems to climate change and reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And the major projects, the group I work with are related to digital tools in a project called Agroecological Transitions that is targeting to scaling technical assistance using digital. Another project is focused on carbon markets for incentivizing and de-risking a transition to low carbon beef, as well as we are working with private sector, especially global meat packers, to develop emission factors to support climate commitments to reduce emissions from beef production, of course. And in this context, just briefly, Richard, the Agroecological Transitions project will support improved use of good practices and traceability tools, for example, for incentives to smallholders in the Amazon region, in Brazil especially. And in this work, we are reviewing tools, we are mapping out and systematizing knowledge on production practices and tools, digital tools, and also designing and improving these tools with the help of farmers in the region. And related to carbon markets, we are working in the Orinoquia region in Colombia, that through the adoption of improved forages, which were developed by CIAT, we've been tracking the influence of these forages, and we've been basically seeing a large potential for soil carbon sequestration. And then this condition could be eventually eligible for carbon markets, and we are exploring these opportunities with a few partners in there. So basically, through these efforts, we are gathering a significant amount of data on farmers' practices, soil organic carbon change, and we are developing over 100 new emission factors from beef production systems across 6 countries in Latin America. So that's basically what we've been doing lately when it comes to livestock and mitigation. So Richard, I stop there, and happy to continue this discussion.
Great, thank you very much there, Sinura. We'll let Majaliwa say a little bit about the RUFORM initiative, and then we'll have everybody back to have more of a conversation. And if there are any questions that these discussions raise within the participants, just stick your questions in the Q&A, and we'll try to incorporate that in the next 20 minutes or so. So Majaliwa, would you like to introduce yourself and your network and say a little bit about some of the things that you are doing in?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'm very happy to be here, and thank you for the invitation. I'm called Majaliwa Mwanjalolo Jackson Gilbert. I'm a physicist by training with a bias in environmental studies. So I hold 2 masters, one in physics and one in environment, and a PhD in soil science. I've been a professor at University of Makerere, Uganda, up to recently. I joined RUFORM last year in November. And in RUFORM, I manage the regional anchor universities. RUFORM is a regional university forum for capacity building in agriculture. We have 157 member universities across Africa. Among our members, we have 4 major language regions. We have Arabic, the French, English, and the Portuguese. I will discuss this in the challenges and how it affects the working together. With the support of GRA, we are supporting 8 teams working on emissions. But also with the support of IDRC, we will start supporting again 8 other teams working on climate change and artificial intelligence. But over the last 10 years, RUFORM has sponsored more than 50 teams working on climate change and greenhouse gas emissions. Richard, I think I've submitted. That's what I can say about RUFORM.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for that. So we sent you a few questions that we wanted to discuss, and I think the first area, very much in the philosophy of GRA, is about bringing organizations, groups of people together to work together on common projects. The Pathways to Dairy Net Zero project that Tim has mentioned is one example, but I'm just wondering if you each in turn might say something about the constraints and the challenges of working together at a global level. I'm thinking about who you might partner with, who might drive those kind of initiatives, where the drive for change is in the global livestock industry, where I think Majaliwa, you mentioned about language. Maybe you'd say something more about language and those kind of constraints. So maybe Tim, do you want to?
Hi. Yeah, I mean, data opportunities and challenges. Sorry, challenges for working together.
Yeah.
I think one of the reality is that we're often competing for the fairly scarce resources. So and I honestly think that's one of the major constraints to all different organisations working more closely together is that we're somewhat in competition for resources.
I mean, in terms of avoiding duplication of efforts, that I mean, I suppose if there's limited resources, that's a constraint on duplication of effort. But if we talk together better, if we shared information better,
yeah. Well, I mean, if we're working together on the same projects, I suppose I think that's the way to avoid that. So I think there's an opportunity to have, you know, fairly large collaborative projects that are well resourced, so that people can work in a kind of relaxed, collegiate way towards common objectives and sharing the resources that are generated. I think that's the only real way forward. But with different organisations scrabbling for funds and doing their own thing, there's bound to be a lot of duplication.
Yeah.
So I think that's probably the main way forward to avoid that.
But in terms of the traditional model, where it's kind of academic universities, institutes, and centres and universities competing for those kind of funds, how would you see the engagement with the industry? I mean, I think one of my hobby horses would be the fact that certainly in the dairy sector, and I guess in the meat sectors as well, that in many parts of the world, the processing industry is a big driver of change and collaboration in this area.
Yeah, I mean they are, and there's no doubt that more from our sort of public sector organizations point of view, we need to work more closely with the private sector, not just to take advantage of data collection and so on, but also to achieve anything at scale. I think it's the only way that we will ever achieve anything at scale is by collaborating with the private sector. But
so
obviously, when they're, we need sort of pre-competitive, as they refer to it, things that we can work together on, and that they can feel that they can share information on.
So it spills over into one of the things that we were discussing yesterday about data and access to data, getting hold of data. That's working with big industry globally is part of that mix. Suniro, your thoughts? I mean, you work in an organization that's got lots of nodes across the world, and so there's some inbuilt collaboration within the organization. But how about constraints to working together with other organizations, and particularly what could GRA do? I mean, some of the mechanisms that GRA has in terms of trying to encourage collaborative funding in terms of supporting training and development.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. And just to complement the previous one, and I think we should, in terms of data collection, data sharing, information sharing, I think we should harness this, let's say, the opportunity to work with private sector, right? And we've been working with a few meat packers, as I mentioned at the beginning, and it's impressive to see how much primary data they can raise and can gather in a very short term, I would say so, because they have these larger meat packers. We are talking about having millions of suppliers, 500,000 suppliers, and etc. And they all have data about their suppliers, right? And then if we come up with a good plan or a kind of win-win situation to work together, or to refine the way they put data together to get a data set that is comprehensive for science, I think we can go further in very quickly. So I think these opportunities is real, considering that, as you know, most of these companies and these large corporations, they have already set, or they are setting climate commitments. So they will need data to better set these climate commitments and better track these climate commitments and better implement these climate commitments. And again, the advantage I see of working with the private sector is that we can move fast, really fast, in terms of data collection, understanding the effect of practice and implementation of practice, because the capillarity of the private sector is really impressive.
So you were in that context, you were talking about digital tools and rapid ways of getting data. Could you say a little bit more about that? What means, I think in a traditional research institute setting, we might be working with a few fields and putting some gas measurement chambers out, or we might be putting some cows in respiration chambers and looking at effects of diets. But I mean, what's the scale and the data collection that you're able to get, and what kind of tools are you using to get at that data?
No, thanks for this question. We are in the very beginning of this project in terms of implementation. So now we are reviewing digital tools globally and locally when it comes to livestock, and how these tools, especially how inclusive these tools are to farmers and especially smallholders. And then what we've seen is that, of course, digital tools can help us quite a bit in terms of putting data together, but especially on data and knowledge sharing, right? We can put data together, we can process this data, we can co-create practices, and we can disseminate those practices with the help of farmers and for farmers in order to scale best practices and etc. And so for the next 2 years, we will be looking at the potentials of digital tools when it comes to livestock in the Amazon region. And I'm pretty much looking forward to sharing more results with you. But we are very glad that we have this opportunity, and we think that we can move these in a very good pace.
So just for clarity, the types of tools that you're thinking about there, is that gas sensing equipment, or activity, or production recording, or all of that?
We are looking at 2 types of tools. Tools providing technical assistance and tools providing performance assessment.
So yeah, some precision monitoring tools to aid farm management, to improve technical efficiency by having better management based on information about the animals, and performance type of tools, but not you're not talking about tools for looking at the gases themselves. You're looking more at the production and the technical efficiency of the production and disease identification, or
we are looking at farm tools that provide practice and also provide climate informed management, I would say so. So the tools, it's a multi-purpose tools. So ideally, they also record the data necessary to run our greenhouse gas emissions balance, right? And if not running the carbon balance by itself, it should be able to at least put together the activity data necessary to run these estimates.
So some of the key words in the background of this are about scale, and about working with industry, and about digital tools, and putting all that together in a new way of looking at looking at livestock systems.
Exactly, and if I may add something, and also in the context of de-risking the transition, because when we talk about best practices and we look at Latin America context, for example, we are talking about practices that we know of them for more than 30 years, I would say so. There is no rocket science, there is no novelty in terms of practice, but what is lacking is actually the implementation. And one of the barriers for implementing those mitigation practices is the risk. Although they are good, they cost. And if a farmer, in many cases, decides to implement, the farmers is assuming some risks. And risks are actually preventing most of the farmers from adopting best practices or other practices or changes. And we are also looking at opportunities for de-risking those practices. And in some cases, we are evaluating what is the potential of carbon markets to de-risk investment and stimulate and de-risk investment. So I think is scale and de-risking are the two messages from here, from the work we are doing actually.
Yeah, thank you very much. This stage, maybe we want to bring in Majaliwa in there into this discussion from an African perspective. You from your description of Ruforum, you've obviously been very successful in supporting lots of initiatives within the region in training and development. Earlier on, Tim was saying that one of the big challenges is financial support for some of these activities. There are potential opportunities through the carbon market, and that area we can see the big opportunities around things like improving feed quality and health in many low middle income country livestock systems. What are your thoughts around the constraints and opportunities there, particularly for collaboration and based on your experiences?
Thank you, Richard. I agree with colleagues on what they have said, but the situation in Africa is a bit different. One of the biggest challenge, of course, is the capacity. One of the colleagues, the first colleague talked about the resources, and here we could actually see the financial and the human and infrastructure resources. We have localized expertise on the continent. I think the countries which are largely involved in such studies are South Africa, Kenya, a bit of Egypt, and Nigeria. For other countries, we are actually trying now to build capacity for some of those countries. And the localized expertise has an implication on the generation of knowledge within the continent, and therefore the visibility of some of the universities at the global scale. Many people may not want to get involved with people with very, very small or little experience in gas emission. So that affects those universities with limited expertise. The second thing at the level of the continent is basically the language barrier. As I said, we have member universities within 4 language regions: the Arabic, the French, English, and then the Portuguese. The issue of communication to build teams becomes an issue. basically, you actually see, as I said, where we have sufficient expertise are basically countries speaking English. We have very limited capacity in the French, Lusophone, and Arabic countries. But the support we got from GRA was very useful for us to bring teams from also those countries which are where we don't have sufficient expertise. And we hope with the new initiative with IDRC, we will be able to get more teams, because basically we encourage our member universities to team up between the strong and the weak to build capacity for the weak. That's what I can say for the moment, Richard.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. For those that were in the session yesterday, I'm just, if there were any thoughts in relation to some of the things that the global dairy and global beef industries were raising these kind of issues about. Well, I think we've touched on it already to an extent, this fact that there's huge mitigation potential in theory in low middle income countries, but actually making that happen is very difficult, and we've talked about the constraints there. The other thing that we were talking about was the kind of the global food system, the complexity of the global food system, and its effect on countries making decisions about their own emissions profiles and food security, and that not necessarily being the most relevant. I think, you know, there was an example about you know, Irish exports of low emissions dairy products into North Africa, for example, how all that kind of works out on the trade side of things. Any thoughts on anything that you picked up yesterday? Or we've only got a couple of minutes left before we're due to be finishing, so we'll try and wrap up.
Yeah, I can come in here, Richard. If you can hear me there.
Go on then. Yep.
Yep.
Go ahead, Sinead.
Yeah. So yeah, I think really yesterday we were picking up on, you know, we need greater MRV, so measuring. I think that came up from both the dairy and the beef side, and I think through what were the speakers today in this session kind of highlighted their efforts on measuring, you know, even if it's performance, like Scenario was talking about there, but more measurements. But I suppose that's what we do need to increase across Africa and South America, is, I suppose, increasing measurements of greenhouse gases in those regions. And if GRA could support that, I think that'd be very useful. And exactly as well, the second point, as you bring up, Richard, about, you know, we need to be cognizant of countries setting challenging targets for countries that can produce you know, agricultural products, beef and dairy, quite efficiently, for other countries that might not be able to produce them as efficiently themselves. So that's another area that's important in relation to the discussions there today. Thanks.
Okay, thanks. John has a question, then there's a couple.
Yeah, Richard, I know you're trying to get to a close here. Just a quick observation. Look, I think what's coming through from the presenters this morning is that the real importance of coordination and collaboration. Tim made the point that there's far too much competition out there between people all trying to basically push in the same direction. I mean, it says to me that this is the power of the GRA in coordinating those efforts, the power of Reforum, the power of the CG in bringing these things together. I'm just looking at Richard Tiffin's diagram this morning of having nodes connected to supernodes. So you've got all these general coordinating efforts. They're all doing a fantastic job, but who's coordinating those efforts themselves? I mean, whether that's a question for the UN, I don't know, but it does say to me that linking efforts together seems to be the way forward. We'll always be competing for resources otherwise.
Thanks very much. That's very helpful, John. Just a couple of questions in the chat, and then I'll try and draw things together. There's one question for Majaliwa, it says, can you say a little bit more about the point of bringing strong and weak together that you mentioned in an initiative? Can you say a little bit more about that? What's happening? What's or is that just something that's planned?
Thank you very much. For the IDRC initiative, basically we know that there are particular countries where artificial intelligence expertise exists. This is, as I said, South Africa, Egypt, we have Benin, and Kenya. So those are countries where we know that artificial intelligence expertise exists. So we actually ask teams coming from those countries to partner with teams with limited expertise. It's one of the preconditions, the first criteria for selection, so that we can build capacity of the weak institutions using the strong, relatively strong institutions. So that's what we have been doing even in the past experiences. That's what we have been actually doing at Blue Forum.
Great. And there's the last question in the chat is Zambia is, this is from Kabema. Zambia is currently implementing a project funded by NZ government on the compilation of NDCs from livestock production activities. Is there a way of partnering with FAO to scale up that intervention? I guess that's probably something that can be taken offline in terms of FAO's involvement in projects. So thanks very much to the panel for a really interesting discussion there. I think overall it's highlighted that there are a number of things that GRA and its groups and networks are already involved in that are relevant to this collaboration, and particularly collaboration around data. So there are things like our networks bringing together academic expertise and bringing data sets together. We have activity promoting grant funding schemes, trying to encourage funders to come together into more global and collaborative funding schemes like the ERANET schemes within Europe. There are activities, and New Zealand has been very pioneering in this in terms of developing measurement capabilities within Africa. And of course, GRA has the Cliff Grad scheme, encouraging opportunities for PhD students in developing countries to get some experience in other labs in other parts of the world. So there are some of the things that we've talked about that are that are things that we do, no doubt could do better. There are other things that I think have come up in our discussion today that I think are good things for us to think about in the future. More engagement with private industry. We tend to work with other academics, but that's something for us to think about. The scale of our ambition and our engagement with industry. Obviously, the engagement with the Global Dairy Platform and that dairy project is an example of going in that direction with people with scale and capacity and data and the ability to move things and drive change in the industry. Couple of other thoughts that have come up, I think, about linking of efforts together is something for us to think about. And one that I hadn't particularly expected was the one about language barrier. Of course, I'm very privileged that English has become a very common language across the scientific community, but that's if that's constraining some of our activities in getting information out, then that's a good thing to think about. Thanks very much, everybody. We've had a good hour and 20 minutes or so now, and we're going to take a break. We'll give you a 10-minute break now, so comfort break. Have a glass of water or whatever, just refresh yourselves and come back to listen to the presentations from our network leads after the break. I should say that the way that we have Zoom set up, that there may be a bit of moving of chairs and noise in the background in the next 10 minutes or so as we tee up our speakers. We're not able to switch off our to go into a backstage room, if you like, to have our conversations. So just encourage you, if you're not involved, just switch off your switch off the volume on your computer for 5 or 10 minutes, but come back at 25 to the hour, and we'll kick off with the network presentations. Thank you very much.
Great job, Richard.
Yeah, good job, Richard. Excellent.
Yeah, that flowed nicely.
It did. They were very good presentations, I thought.
Excellent. Yeah, really good.
Yeah, complimentary. Good.
I think as well, just the fact there was just three there, was useful for discussion. It allowed conversation to flow a bit better, rather than bringing in 5 or 6.
Yeah. Have we got David and Suzanne and Tony and Nick and Sharon?
Yes, they're all online, so I'll start promoting them to panelists now. So they should be joining, and then once we get them in, then I'll give it a few minutes, and then Tim and Majaliwa and I think Richard T has already popped off, and Siniro, but then Majaliwa and Tim, I can put you into the attendee list as well, so you don't have to stay in this side.
That's great. Thanks very much. I didn't check in the participant list, but we have all the network leads.
I think everybody's here from what he's saying, so that's really good.
Yeah.
And it's such a good link to this, because this is all about collaboration and how we're doing it. So at our scale.
Yep. Just checking. We've got David, Suzanne.
Hello.
Hello, David. Hello, Sharon.
Hello.
You've been promoted.
But not in the financial sense.
No.
Oh, really? No.
Hi, Suzanne.
We could talk about that afterwards.
Was Nick there? Is he? He's probably on his way. Yeah. Hi, Tony.
Morning.
Got you all in corporate LRG backgrounds and a bit of clever technology too.
Isn't this the color teal? Isn't this the blue-green?
Mine's in reverse to me. Is that just...
No, you're okay, Tony.
It's yours only.
That's correct. Yeah.
It's there to throw you. Yeah.
Totally.
It looks very odd on the screen because it looks the correct way around for everybody apart from your own one, but you're reassured that it is the correct way around.
Which you would have thought they would have fixed, right? not the conference company, but Zoom.
Yeah.
I think that's actually a setting. So it's you can swap it. So if you go into your video settings, there's whether you have mirrored or not. I think it's people's preferences to whether you like to have it mirrored so that you can, your left and right more easily or not.
I don't know.
I rather don't touch anything.
Yeah.
Once you get into the meeting and you're there, it's good to go. So does everybody have slides to share, or we're easy? You can either share slides or just talk. A mix would probably be the ideal, but if you've got slides,
yeah, I've got slides. Yes, thank you.
Yep,
it's good. I haven't seen Nick at the moment yet. Is Nick?
He's in the attendee list. I've requested he joins us, but he might have just ducked off to grab a drink. So.
Right. I see. Yeah.
Then anyone who has slides, if you'd like to, you can do a quick test if you're concerned at all. So if you're happy, you can do a quick test of your sharing now.
Yeah, go first.
Sure.
Yeah.
Is that
Yes,
okay?
good. Great.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Suzanne? Looks great.
Yep.
Perfect. Tony? Very good. Nick, we think snipped off for a cup of tea, and Sharon.
Okay.
Excellent. Excellent.
Okay.
And with your one, so we're doing 5 + 5 for everybody, and then we'll let Sharon have a second bite for the Culturomics flagship.
You're so kind.
Yeah. Good.
So did you say we are allowed a glass of water only, Richard, at this break?
Yeah, you've got another 4 minutes, so yeah, you put your cameras off and have a slurp.
Water, that was water.
Yeah, that's what my question was about the drink. No,
We'll assume that's water.
Yeah, well, it's 5 o'clock somewhere, but it's a bit early for us to have anything other than water.
it's 9:30 in the evening here. Do you know how many people were attending yesterday?
About 60, I think.
Yeah, so it was about 60, just over, I think.
Same as today now then.
Yeah. Yeah.
With this, we'll need to. I'll just emphasise the Q&A session, because each of you are trying to just take a few questions. Probably only time for a couple of questions on each of your networks, but we'll get those in the Q&A. Are you able to see the Q&A, or do I need to read them? I think I probably need.
We can see, I think.
You all should have access. You'll just need to open it from the Q&A button at the bottom.
Yeah.
Then
Richard, do you want Sinead and I to jump in if we can see stuff? And we sort of said beforehand we might do that. Okay, I can do that, yeah.
Richard, just to check, after I give them the RMG update, you want me to stop for questions before Culturomics?
Yes, please. Yeah.
Okay.
We'll just do 5 and effectively sort of 5 minutes presentation, 5 minutes questions for each of the networks,
Okay.
and then
Okay.
we'll move. Then I'll
No
introduce
problem.
the flagships.
No problem.
Great.
right, here's Nick.
Here's Nick. Hi, Nick. We're all good. You're going to share screen when are you going to present, or are you just talking?
No, I've got. I can share screen.
Great. Do you want, try that for a second, and then we're happy.
No problem. You see that?
It's coming. Yep, that's brilliant. Yep.
Yep.
Great.
That's great. We're happy with everybody. That's great.
Okay. And good timing as well. So about a minute to go. I can pop up. I can put that holding slide back up. So everyone, while you're sort of not on, you feel free to have your camera off, and you can stay muted. And then as Richard sort of works through and introduces you, you can come on screen and then share your slides at time.
Okay, welcome, welcome back, everybody. I hope you had a good comfort break and are raring to go again for the second half of day 2 of LRG 2022. And now we're going to move over to looking at our research networks. We have 5 research networks within the Livestock Research Group. And today we're going to have presentations from them largely focused on activities that the groups have been developing over the last year. And tomorrow we'll have a much more open session, and you'll be pleased to know that tomorrow you will actually be able, it will be in a more meeting format that you'll be able to ask your questions directly. You'll be able to switch your cameras on and be visible and ask questions, because tomorrow is the opportunity to talk about the program going forward for the next year, the 2023 program for the networks and the LRG. So we wanted to make it a bit easier for you to jump in and be more proactive in the questioning tomorrow. But that's tomorrow. Today we're going to be updating on the work of the networks. So we have 5 networks. We've got 5 network leads lined up. Each they're going to give a short presentation about the activity in their groups, and then there'll be short opportunity, just a few minutes, to ask questions of each of the networks about what they've been doing, and any suggestions that you have about that. So please, if you have any questions that come up during each of the presentations, just put them into the Q&A box as we go along, and then I can ask those at the end of each of the presentations. So we got 50 minutes now coming up to look at 5 groups, and we're going to start off with David Yanez Ruiz, who's going to talk about the work of the feed and nutrition network. So I'll hand over to David.
Thank you, Richard, and good morning, afternoon, evening, everyone. Can you see the slides?
That's great.
Yeah, great, thank you. So yeah, I'm going to present a quick update on the Feed and Nutrition Network, and Richard gave a very nice overview yesterday. So I'm going to provide a few more details on the network. I took over the coordination of the network in June from Andrea Banning. But Andrea and Alex still helping and contributing to the coordination of the network. So we really work as a team, and he did a great job. So we're gonna keep working for at least for another 2 years as a team to trying to make the most of this collaborative work. Just to introduction, the network has 3 main objectives. The first one is trying to summarize and evaluate the available data on mitigating greenhouse gases emissions on ruminants by nutritional means. The current focus is methane, but we've been doing other works around nitrogen. The second one is develop some recommendations on methane mitigation by nutritional means for the different stakeholders. And the third one is identify gaps in knowledge and focus research on priority issues for future activities. So we could have a physical meeting, as Richard said yesterday. The meeting was held in Orlando at the GRA, and it was great to meet almost everyone again and have the opportunity for interactions. In that meeting, we had two sections. In the first section, we had presentations from the CEDAS project, which is an air gas project led by Andrea Banning that was coming to an end. Working on the influence and the connection between nutrition and emissions from NEO management, and we spent the first part of the meeting hearing from the different work packages that were presenting their last results, and then we had a second part in which we addressed other issues around the network. We presented new initiatives such as the new AirNet integrity project, which is led by INTA in Argentina, and is one of the main projects in the coming years in the network, but also some results from the methane project in South Eastern Asian countries. So we had a mix of different topics to address. I will not go into detail into all of them because we have then another presentation on the flagship, but we had time to interact and to resume some of the collaboratory work that was more difficult to continue during the pandemic. So the Feed and Nutrition Network, as I said, was related to different projects. We started with the Global Network project, which was an AirNet starting at 2014 and officially finishing in 2017. But it's been quite productive project, and we still have some publications to deliver. So that was a great start to provide funding to a core group in the network. And then we continued that work with CEDARS, the project led by Andre Banning, which is now finished. And now we have another project in which 3 different continents participate: Latin America, Europe and New Zealand, and started recently. So we can at least predict that the activity of the network is got the support or some financial support, which is crucial to take these networks to a successful activity. We have other projects that are still running, such as the Latin American, Caribbean, and Southeast Asian projects related to methane production, and I will mention that later on some publications. But I think it's important to note that a big part of the activity from most of the FNM members come from in-kind contribution, and I think this is probably the same for all of the networks. Without this contribution from most of the partners, the activity of these networks will not be possible. So we have a few outputs from the network. We've been quite productive in generating papers of 2 types of papers, position papers mainly related to different types of methodology issues related to nitrogen metabolism, excretion, and methane, and then other papers related to collating databases of different kind of data and performing meta-analysis to produce different prediction equations. Just to give you an examples of the first kind of papers, the position papers on methodologies, you may know some of them. We produced publications on in vivo measurement techniques for methane, the same for in vitro, and then the same related to nitrogen metabolism in ruminants, then also some aspect related to the uncertainties in enteric methane inventories, and the same for some of the different models that we can use to predict farm emissions. So we've been quite productive in this area. Then in the area of producing prediction models, we published a few years ago the models from intercontinental database on dairy cattle, the same for beef cattle. We are about to publish a similar one on sheep, and it's on the second round of revision in a journal. So hopefully very soon we can send the publication to everyone. This is a similar one from the same Global Network project, and then other initiatives happening in Latin America and the Caribbean, also coming from the FNN and led by Andre Banning and Alex Ristoff, produce similar papers to improve our estimates of methane production from different kind of production systems. And the last paper that we published is, you may know this one, is from led by Claudia and Alex on the analysis of the adoption of the most effective strategies to mitigate methane emissions by ruminants, and it's been highly cited in the last months, and this is the result of a long term analysis of treatments database that we started in. It was started by Alex Christoph Group, and then it was also dealt in the Global Network project, and finally we could publish the result. And this is something that we will discuss tomorrow in the future activities of then on the networks, because we need to decide what to do and in which direction we should go with this resource that we have still available. So we started with a modest number of countries when the network started back in 2014. And we've been increasing the number of countries that have been participating in the network. And since we initiated the methane flagship projects in Latin America and Caribbean countries and in Southeast Asia, we were able to incorporate some other colleagues from these regions of the world, which is great. So the network at the moment, I think is quite alive and productive. We have, as I said, a number of projects and initiatives that can feed activity and promote activity of the members. Of course, papers are not the ultimate goal, but I think it's a good means of addressing at least the first two objectives of the network on providing recommendations and also on analyzing the different mitigation options. Since June 2022, when I took over, we had 18 new members from 7 countries, which is great news. But still, we're lacking participation from some areas, and we are going to be working on that, especially from Eastern Europe, Africa, and Middle East. And to address the third objective on trying to identify gaps of knowledge and provide potential solutions, we are initiating, as part of FNN, it's a Global Research Alliance project, a flagship project on feed additives, and I will not provide details now as we have another session coming later on. And I think with that said, that's all from my side. Richard.
Great, thank you very much, David. That's a good good update and encouragement for people to engage with this group, and looking at your maps there, thinking about ways that we can involve countries that have not so far engaged with the network. Feed and nutrition is a pretty ubiquitous part of and a challenge in many areas. So good opportunities to link other people in there. There's just one question that's come up in the Q&A, and it's not really about feed and nutrition. So, but I'll respond to it. It's a question about carbon sequestration. So stand you down on that one, David, unless you really want to. But it's so what's the threshold carbon sequestration activities a farmer has to undertake to qualify for carbon credit transfer, and then understanding mobilization and sensitization to understand carbon sequestration and their roles in this, and are there sources of funding for it. I think probably the answer to that is in the GRA structures. Carbon sequestration is actually, there are networks within the integrative research group that are actually looking at that much more intensively than the livestock, and it's probably one of those areas where we do need to look at the interface between the livestock research group and the integrative research group, because it came up in discussion yesterday in terms of data and metrics, as you know, as a big gap in terms of livestock systems. So you know, I think within these 5 groups, there's not a particular emphasis on carbon sequestration in any of them. So yeah, that's something to look at. Okay, thanks very much, David. We'll call up Suzanne now to talk about. So Suzanne Rowe from the Animal Selection Genetics Genomics Group to network to talk about work in their group. Over to you, Suzanne.
Sorry, that was slower than it should have been. Okay, can you hear me? Can you see me?
Yeah, we can hear you, can see you, all good.
Yep. Hi, everyone. So I'm going to talk about the Animal Selection Genetics and Genomics Network, or the ASGGN. That's a bit of a mouthful. I didn't name it, but I'm the current lead. And our objectives are really to collaborate and connect, and to define traits and breeding objectives. So we're all about using genetics and genomics, or breeding, to achieve the rumen related goals that we have, mainly around methane emissions and feed efficiency. We tend not to publish, although we are publishing a review paper at the moment. We tend to share data, methods, and protocols. And I would say that the biggest thing that most of our members get out of the group is sharing protocols, is defining new ways to measure traits, and working out how to do it, sharing SOPs, sharing ways to measure, sharing animal welfare or ethics type protocols. At the start of the year, this is what our network looked like. We have between 100 and 200 members, some gaps, but I'm really pleased to say that over the year, we've really started to fill those gaps, and we're over 200 members, and we have a really nice global representation, not necessarily in the people that contribute information, but certainly we're seeing a much broader representation in the people that are gaining information from the group, and hopefully over time we will see countries such as Africa and Asia really start to contribute. We have a website where we take registrations and disseminate some information, but most of the information, I have to say, is going out through social media. We have an active Twitter group where when we're going to have a workshop or we're going to have a meeting, it tends to go out through there, and people tend to discuss and use that forum. Last year we had an online discussion. It was very successful. It was very difficult to find a time that suited everybody around the world. The Australians, I have to say, were very proactive and got up at 4 a.m. in the morning to present. But it was a really great way to include everyone. This year, as Richard alluded to yesterday, we were fortunate enough to be able to go back to what we do best, and that's meet. And we tend to meet at meetings where we know that the people or the members that are really interested in breeding and in what the network can offer will already be attending. And this year there it was the World Congress on Genetics Applied to Livestock Production. That meeting runs every 4 years. We try to always have a meeting there, and we were successful this year in securing part of the conference accommodation, so we could actually have the meeting on site with the main conference. We met the day before the conference. It was really successful. There were 75 participants from 25 countries. I was really pleased to see the global spread. We had 8 talks. We had a mixture of technologies and methods. We had a mixture of old methods and new methods, and we had a mix of sheep, beef, and dairy cattle. No goats this year, but a really nice mixture. And the other thing that we had a mix of was countries with really established programs, talking about where they are in terms of breeding and selection, and countries who've only just started to think about what they're going to measure and how they're going to measure. So an example of that is the Italian bull program, where they're really at the start of what they're doing. But then we had Filippo Miglior from Vancouver talking about a very, very well-established program in Canada. We also had Robert Banks from Australia, and he gave some really nice insights into a country that has changed their political focus in the last 4 or 5 years. And he stood up and he really said, you know, we're at the beginning of something, and if we don't take on this challenge and we don't start breeding for or genetic merit for methane emissions or lowered methane emissions and for more efficient production systems, then our livestock industries will be paying a carbon tax forever. And he really sort of brought forward the challenges that they're facing in Australia. And the other thing we did was talked about a flagship that's finished. So we've had a flagship running across the network where we've been looking at microbial profiling to predict methane and feed efficiency, and we've collated over 1,000 microbial profiles from across very different systems, from silver pasture through to quite intensive systems, and we've looked at prediction of traits using samples. So the learnings from this year, I think, was that as geneticists, we really need to get in there and go hard and go early, that our partnerships are becoming very, very important as we share our methods, that some old methods that we talked about maybe 4 or 5 years ago are suddenly being rejuvenated and regenerated, and we can learn from the members that were using those 5 years ago. That new technology, new innovative technology such as infrared technology is going to be a key contributor, and it may actually be really great for the sort of low income, low infrastructure countries, and just remembering that some countries are really only just starting. And we are producing a review to try and sort of draw together the messages that we're pulling in from our network, from the established members and from the new members for all aspects of what we're trying to achieve. So I'll leave it there and take any questions if there are any.
Brilliant, thank you very much, Suzanne. And looking at Q&A, there are no questions in the Q&A. Just reminding everybody, if you want to put any questions in the Q&A, try to dump them into the Q&A before we get to the end of the talk. But if there's any quick questions, we'll take anything there. If not, I think we'll move on. That was a nice summary of quite a wide activity, a very active group, and really exciting to see face to face. I think one of the things we'll talk about in relation to our annual meeting is about getting back to face. That's something that's coming up, but it's been really good in the last months to be getting back to face meetings. Okay, so next network we're going to look at is the manure management network, and Tony is going to present on that one. So over to Tony.
Sorry, thanks, Richard. Just trying to find the unmute button there when the things get, it all gets very small. Sorted. Okay, hey, hi everybody. Look, I'm Tony van der Werden. I'm with Ag Research in New Zealand, and I'm one of the co-leads of the Manure Management Network. This is probably one of the smaller networks, maybe the smallest. We've got about 80 members, I'd say, across the globe. Our focus is around greenhouse gas emissions from livestock systems and with respect to manure management. So looking at increasing the nutrient use efficiency of manures, improving soil organic matter content, I guess, with the inputs of these manures as well. So I'm just going to touch on the objectives that we have in mind for this network. The first is really developing experimental protocols so that we've got some consistency across researchers across the world in terms of how we measure emissions from manures. And we're talking about manure management here in terms of livestock, housing, storage of manures, land application, as well as excreta deposition done in urine. The second objective is around developing a list of mitigation strategies. I guess this is still work in progress in terms of developing this list, but that would be, I think, very beneficial to many people, particularly policymakers. Thirdly, the minimum reporting of data within publications, and we've been working on this within the DataMan project, and then following on to Mel's some publications, due to come out over the next couple of months or few months around this, and we've already had one out on this topic. Determining the fertilizer replacement value of manures is pretty critical these days, in particular when we're talking about the cost of synthetic fertilizers. That's quite a critical one. And then sort of providing input into the policy recommendations that's supporting the development, sustainable development goals. So I'm just going to touch on 3 particular activities over the last year. The first was a webinar that we ran or hosted back in February. It was chaired by Sinead Waters, which was focusing on the bio-based fertilizers in our circular bioeconomy. Now, I guess this particular topic is incredibly relevant these days. We're trying to increase the circular bioeconomy. There's increasing interest in that, increasing cost of mineral fertilizers. There's the Ukrainian wars having quite an influence there, critically, obviously, and then improving utilization of animal manures. So that particular webinar was went down very well. It was a very interesting presentation, a set of presentations from Patrick Forrestal from Ireland, and Laia Agilicu, pronunciation not good, from Spain, and then Lars Sturman Jensen from Denmark. This webinar, we had over 120 people participating or listening in, and it touched on some pretty key topics, including the nutrient supply of these bio-based fertilizers and how they compare to conventional fertilizers, how to improve the physical chemical properties, the granulation, dewatering, all those types of aspects, and developing assessment programs and compliance methods for these new products. It had a very strong European focus because this is quite a high cost type of technology, unfortunately. So I think it would be wonderful to see further work in this area for lower income countries to be able to find methods and application of this type of technology. So it was really quite a successful webinar. The second is I want to touch on is the AeroNet GRA funded work on mitigating emissions from livestock systems, or MELS, led by Barbara Amon out of ATB Potsdam. It builds on the DataMan project that I led a few years back, focusing on housing and storage emissions. So we had a discussion this morning about databases. This is a database that's online, free to use, free to download. All you have to do is register. It contains a large number of research programs or research results or data from various studies around the world. And the MELS project is focused on the housing and storage emissions. From that work, we've been able to identify key drivers, develop revised emission factors, develop response functions. And so all of this information now gives us the tools to start putting these pieces of the puzzle together to see what is the footprint for these systems. Previous work has been on individual studies, or I guess empirical relationships, or relationships based on very little data potentially. So here we've got a statistically derived data set, large data numbers that are behind these functions. So this is still work in progress. There are some publications coming out of this work. The latest one will be out very soon, hopefully, which describes the housing and storage database. There's going to be further work around developing a prototype decision support tool for this type of analyses and guidance on improving national inventories. The third and last aspect I wanted to talk about in terms of our activities over this year is a stock take of the greenhouse gas research on manure management. The purpose of the stock take, identifying potential collaborators for other researchers, knowing who you can go to who has knowledge in a particular method or topic. And this is also going to be helpful for providing awareness of current research efforts, and that could be helpful for identifying gaps in our knowledge. So that's those are our purposes. collating key information that's from measurement, mitigation, and also modeling research projects. And this is a focus on manure management, including grazing. Now we are active. The network is a very active place. To date, we've collated 124 active projects spread over 17 countries. And I know that there is a lot else going on out there, which has not been captured yet. So we're going to be sending out a template again shortly. It's going to be Excel based this time. The first one was a Word based one, not very clever. So the updated version will be on Excel, and then we'll make that accessible on the GRA Manure Management Network web page, updated annually, and people can open it and download it and utilize that information in terms of contacting key people, identifying gaps. So yeah, I think this is going to be a useful resource going forward. This came about over the last few months. We had our meeting at the GGAA in Florida, where we had a very successful discussion there and talked about this and shared some of the work that's going on around the network. So reiterating what Suzanne said, wonderful to be able to get face-to-face with our colleagues again. So that was after a few years of a break. That's it from me. Thanks, Richard.
Thank you very much, Tony. There's a couple of questions appeared in the Q&A. First one's I'll start at the bottom of the list. It says any work on micro digesters? I guess in Europe there'll be people working on small scale digestion as well as large scale.
Yeah, there is. It's particularly in Europe, as you say. We've captured a little bit of that work within the DataMan database. I think that's an area that's going to increase in effort. But not down here in New Zealand, that's for sure. Yeah.
And then there's another question from Dr. Jared. What is the difference in reduction in emissions between conventional composting and vermicomposting?
Oh gosh, I can't answer that right now. Unfortunately, we don't. In terms of what we've captured in the database, we haven't got any results from vermicomposting in there, and I know that's a big gap. What we have in there is only what's been captured by the people involved in the project. So no, I can't answer that question either.
So it's opportunities if there's people out there with projects on vermicomposting or with data on that approach. It's a gap. It's a gap that we've found.
And I'll just make a wee plug for something I'm going to say tomorrow, and that's we want to grow this database. So if people have got studies that they want to contribute to the database, you can go to the website and there's a template you can download to capture that type of data, which we can then do a QA on and then upload eventually.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. The other question was a microbiology question, which I think Suzanne has been answering, and we may pick up with Sharon later on. That's great. Thank you very much, Tony. So now we're going to move on to the Animal Health Network, and this is one of the networks where we have a new network lead or a new team of network leads, and so I'll hand over now to Nick Wheelhouse to talk about Animal Health Network.
Thank you, Richard. I'll just share that. Hopefully you can all see it okay. So as Richard intimated, myself and Shada took over the Animal Health Network, I suppose officially this time last year at the 2021 LRG meeting. And as he mentioned yesterday, the big priority for this year has been to consolidate our membership and really reconnect with a membership that perhaps had not been as active in the last few years. So The aims of the network are really to bring together our researchers, governments and NGOs and the private sectors to discuss and find interdisciplinary approaches to understand, tackle impacts of climate change on animal health and the impacts of animal health on the environment, and to integrate the animal health interventions into policy settings. Okay, so the two major aims that we've put forward for the network. Now, I think we've beaten Tony here, that we actually at the moment we are possibly the smallest network with 54 members. At the start of last year, one of our priorities, as we said, was to reconnect with our membership, which ostensibly we had about 120 people. And some of the work that we did was to go out to those members and find out really who wanted to remain the membership. And we ended up with 38 of those original members. And since then, we've managed to connect to another 16 from around the world. So we do have a relatively good global network. However, you can see from this diagram, which is on our website, that we still lack members from key areas, particularly which animal health has been mentioned in much of sub-Saharan Africa and in Asia. So if there is any messages here, if anybody would like to contact us, please just email myself and you can become a member overnight. Now, again, we really felt that we needed to connect via the social media and the web, and it has been some work, but we've relaunched our website this year. And now we look to update our links, the projects, meetings and publications on a much more regular and frequent basis. We have relaunched, as I said, the Animal Health Network Twitter account, and it was a brand new Twitter account. So if anybody does follow the old one, unfortunately, we are not posting on that. So please follow us at AHNGRA. As you can see there, that's an up-to-date screenshot because it's from today, one of the tweets promoting today's event. So we've also been looking at face-to-face meetings, and we again use the GRA22 as a platform to run a workshop, and it was a hybrid workshop. We felt that a number of our members were not attending the conference or able to attend the conference. So with the big shout out to one of our members, Angela, who stood in on site, we managed to make this a hybrid event, and it was very successful. For us, we had 45 attendees from a number of countries where we don't have active members. There were presentations from myself and Shada on the network itself, and the images there of Angela Schwarm, who's looking at the impacts of immunology on greenhouse gas production, or actually greenhouse gas production in animals, on immunology and on the ability to combat infection. Paul Launch, who brought a new aspect, which was on welfare and greenhouse gas emissions, and two of the stalwarts of the network, Phil Scoose from Morden Research Institute and Michael McLeod, who were looking there at the impact of specific diseases on emissions. And what I will plug again is that the recordings of all those are actually present on the website. So if anybody is interested in finding out a bit more, the website is where you can find it all. We've also felt that other ways of connection, and whilst it's not an always popular thing to receive an email through the box, we felt that a regular newsletter was something that the membership would appreciate. And the reason that Yenny here, Daisy Ruiz is here, is we've been working with one of the CliffGAD's alumni who has been helping us put together the website and the newsletter, and she's been instrumental, and she designed this newsletter. So if Yenny is actually in here in the LRG meeting, it's a big thanks to her pushing this forward. And this is going out quarterly now. So we're looking forward to pushing out the next one towards the end of this month or into November. And we've been asking our membership to provide us with information about the meetings and about publications that they've been producing in the meantime. We're also sharing this online as well, which is freely accessible to anybody. In terms of publications, the network itself has not produced any publications in the last year. Our members have published a number of peer-reviewed publications, but I thought I would end this short presentation by highlighting a couple of very policy relevant publications that have come out from our network members. Acting on Methane, which was authored by Phil Scoose and was the basis for his presentation at GRA 2022, but also the important FAO GRA Global Dairy Platform publication, The Role of Animal Health in National Climate Commitments. And this was the primary author of this publication was my co-lead, Shada Roshkan, who's not with us tonight, but and acknowledged a number of the membership who helped with some of the technical details and proofing of the document. And this is something that we're quite proud of, that we can, even on a very small level, we can contribute to quite significant publications. And that is really where we are and where I'd like to leave this tonight. If anybody's got any questions, please pop them in the Q&A, but otherwise, please email me and I'll be happy to provide more information.
Great, thank you. Thank you very much for that, Nick. At the moment, there's no questions for you, although there's a delayed question from the manure management grouping from Mishek Mulilo, who asks about, so I'm not asking you, Nick, just asks, manure management is a challenge in traditional livestock keeping, especially in Tanzania. Is there any possibility of teaming up to change people's mindset? I guess that's a common refrain around the world, that people have tended to see manure as a problem rather than a resource. So it's, I guess, central to manure management's grouping. So I just point you to Tony, whether you could contact Tony directly. That would be good on that one. Certainly lots of opportunities there, and Tony's responding to you in the chat in the Q&A, so that's good. Okay, we're going to move on now to try and keep to time, and we're going to introduce Sharon Hughes, who's going to speak to us about the last of the 5 groups, the Rumen Microbial Genomics Network.
Hi all. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Sharon Hughes. I lead the Rumen Microbial Genomics Network for the LRG.
It's all good.
Okay, great. It wouldn't move on there for a second, but it's fine now, I think. So the ethos, okay, of the RMG network is really the same ethos that underpins the LRG and underpins the activities of the GRA. It is really to bring people together. So we have enhanced communication and collaboration. We avoid duplication, and we also work globally, because the challenges that we face and our stakeholders face are global. Also to exchange students and technicians and staff, which I think we've been particularly good at, and also to generate standard operating protocols, which has also been part of some of our wider projects. So I think I'll move on from that. So we have had a number of meetings over the years. So the first one was in 2011, and the network was run from New Zealand at that point in time. Believe it or not, I couldn't quite believe this when I was putting this talk together, but I started leading this network just after the GRA meeting in Dublin in 2013. So that's up to 10 years next year, and I've no idea where that time has gone. But just to note on here, we do have, if you're interested, if you're going anyway to the INRAE and Rowett Gut Microbiology Conference, which is in Aberdeen in June next year, we will be holding a network event ahead of the meeting. So we're in discussion about which times at the minute, so I can't tell you yet. I know we wanted to concentrate on the last year, but I'm also aware that we have new countries, new people who have joined. So just to give a very quick backdrop, in 2018, as a network, we produced this review article on the understanding of microbiomes and their management for the challenges around ruminant agriculture. So that particular review now has had over 200 citations, which is excellent. We also in 2020 as a network produced a book on improving rumen function. So it's a book that I certainly know my own students use quite a lot. It's a very good book, particularly for those students who are perhaps starting out in the area. I am now, well, we are now finishing a report on the sustainable use and conservation of microorganisms of relevance to rumen digestion for the FAO Commission. That has been, we have been engaging with all members of the RMG to get some input on that, so that we're ensuring that we're reporting the views of the whole community in that document. I am really hoping that that is finalized in the next week at the latest. So we've been fortunate to have a number of projects underpinning the network. The rumen census and the Hungate 1000, many of you will be aware of. These have been really step-changing projects for the community. And thereafter, we've got a number of the ERANET funded projects and the EU Horizon 2020 projects. And these are really around understanding the microbiomes in terms of livestock challenges and the methane challenge. Many of them as well are looking at dietary interventions. So our linkage with FNN has always been very strong. And actually, some of the FNN members are also members of these projects and vice versa. So, Richard, that's actually the end of my network update. The next slides are the flagship.
Great, thank you very much, Sharon. There, I think, as you say, where the feed and nutrition networks and the manure management network have been incredibly successful in recent times in terms of huge publication outputs from bringing together data sets. The RMG has been really incredibly successful in terms of collaborative projects, and huge successes there in that list, which is really good to see, just illustrating the different ways that we can collaborate in different stages of that. Looking at the questions, there was a question earlier on that was Susanna's had a go at it. It's about utilizing microbiology concept in looking at introducing microorganisms to break methane before it's released from the animal. Obviously, our interest in microbiome, we're interested in manipulating the rumen for an RMG type of way of thinking, but there's also an interest in the microbiome from the breeding point of view and manipulating the microbial community there. But is there activity around trying to have a microbial community that would break down methane before it's actually eructated? No.
That's a very interesting concept, because I'm not aware of any discussion on microbes that break down methane per se, rather microbes that can be used to redirect the hydrogen so that it's taking it away from methanogenesis, if you like. But I'm certainly not aware of that, if I'm interpreting it correctly, actually breaking down methane.
Yeah, so the things like acetogens and other pathways, nitrate reduction or sulfate reduction, those type of things. There's lots of work on that, but whether you could actually get a condition in the rumen that would suit them. I mean, for all of those microbiological changes, getting an environment that's suitable for that type of microorganism is a challenge.
Yeah, where actually there are more and more publications coming out now on the use of direct fed microbials. There was one that I read only last week showing a reduction of 20% in methane through using them for redirection. So it's quite an exciting area that's opening up.
Yeah. But again, so historically, some of the challenges of kind of getting those directly fed those agents to stick in their effects is but it's bread and butter for this group. Yeah.
Yes, well, hopefully.
Okay, and there was one other question that was relating back to interest in the animal health network that Nick has responded to, so that's good. I think we're good there. So that completes our session looking at the 5 networks. We now just have a short opportunity to be updated about 2 flagship projects that have been mentioned a little bit previously in the meeting, but just to get the current status of them. Formally, flagship projects are projects that are established by the Council of GRA, but there are two of the projects that are quite livestock focused. Yesterday, Harry Clark gave some overview of the criteria for establishing flagship projects around accessibility to a wide range of partner countries across the globe, and of being supported by a wide range of partner members. And 12 months ago, we discussed 2 projects that went forward to the GRA Council earlier this year, and both are well on the way to getting established and running. So the first one, I'm going to ask Sharon to just continue and say a little bit about the rumen culturomics project, and then David Yanis will talk about the feed additives project. But over to you then, Sharon.
Thanks, Richard. So the network were very fortunate to get flagship status for this project. I believe it was earlier this year, and the project is around expanding the Hungate collection in reality. So the Hungate collection, as many of you know, has been created a real step change in our understanding of how the rumen microbiome functions. But we also know that we have a number of other microbes in our freezers, and there are global efforts to culture more rumen microbes, whereby we can actually genome sequence them, characterize them, and really enhance that first step on the journey that the Hungate collection created. So this is the concept, and many of you, I'm sure, have heard me talk about this numerous times, and you will be forgiven if you go and get some coffee, because I've been trying to promote this to get flagship status and funding for quite some time. I guess the challenges of a project like this is that it is very fundamental in nature. So what we are proposing in this project is that we really want a global effort into culturing, phenotyping and genotyping as many rumen microbes as possible. Now, the scientific term for this is culturomics. And when we say rumen microbes, we are really talking about all of them, bar maybe the protozoa, which are another level of difficulty, I guess. The reason that I've been talking about this for such a long time is that really, you know, the Hungate collection has given us a massive baseline, but we shouldn't really stand still in this area, because there is now an explosion in these so-called culturomic activities across a number of ecosystems. So, for example, there's been a major effort, as you might predict, in the human field, for example. So people are generally now realizing that in an era where we've had omics to really understand those microbiomes, particularly the rumen microbiome, you can only really do correlative science. So, for example, if you have a low or a high emitting ruminant in terms of methane, you look at their rumen microbiome, and you might be able to correlate certain microbes or certain genes to those phenotypes. But you can't actually say for certain that they are the microbes or the genes that are causing the particular phenotype, unless you physically have those microbes in culture, so that you can really test some key hypotheses. So the timing is rife, because we now have new technologies to culture as well, and some members in the group, including ourselves, have already been doing this for the past year, using the resources that we have and managing to get out many rumen microbes, particularly bacteria, which have been classified as being unculturable, which is really not true. So if we look at the why, I've already stated, you know, the Hungate collection was fantastic, a real game changer for all of us. But if we continue and we try and fill in more of the gaps in the Hungate collection to get a more comprehensive view of the microbes and their genomes, ultimately, you know, we'll be able to move towards improving ribosomal DNA-based inference tools. So what I mean by that, you know, when you look at taxonomy of the microbes, you will use ribosomal DNA-based techniques. And these tell you, you know, the diversity of the microbes, how they're changing, etc. But they don't really tell you how they're functioning. So we developed, as part of the network, a tool called CowPy, and it's based on that Hungate collection, the initial data, which allows you then to infer what the functional changes in your microbiome. And actually, if we can fill these gaps, if we can have a mammoth global task force doing this, there will come a time where we may not need to do shotgun metagenomics. We might be able to just do our ribosomal DNA-based profiling and know the function, because our underlying database will be so strong. And just to put that into context of people who are perhaps not in this field, you know, your shotgun metagenomics costs about £120 sterling per sample, and your 16S for bacteria is something like £20. So all of a sudden, you know, in projects across the world, including lower middle income countries, can do so much more with their data in terms of understanding. And this, of course, this underpins, you know, all of the work that we're doing on additives, or any dietary interventions, you really need to know how, the mechanism of action for those additives. So whilst this flagship may seem really fundamental, it's actually a really required, it's a massive building block that is needed in order to make sense of any dietary interventions that we might take forward. And I think on another note, I touched upon this when we had a discussion just now, Richard. The area of direct fed microbials is expanding rapidly again. And it's expanding as well because there are new technologies to embed those microbes and to make sure that they establish properly in the rumen. With, as I said, a paper I read only last week showing a 20% reduction. And if you think about, all the microbes that we have in culture there, and we will culture more as part of this flagship, there is real potential there to use some of those. And you could use them alongside additives, for example, so that you're stopping perhaps that methanogenesis pathway, but you're also redirecting hydrogen away so that there is also less available for methanogenesis. And also, these microbes, they will give us a massive genetic resource for many industrial applications, whether we're talking about cellulases, novel antimicrobials, etc., that they contain a plethora of goods, I guess. And the aim of this flagship, ultimately, is to have a high impact publication where everyone that's been involved contributes to this one big publication in much the same way as the Hungate collection worked. So this is the nuts and bolts of how we're going to do it. So we will be the main hub in Queen's University, Belfast. So we will be responsible for management and standard operating procedures, etc. And then we'll have a number of co-hubs across the world. So at the minute, you can see those that are confirmed on there. There shouldn't be a question mark over New Zealand, by the way, that's most definite. And also I'm in discussion with some potential collaborators in Africa as well, so that we can really make sure that we're covering all continents. So the idea is that these are the hubs that have the infrastructure to culture, but there will be many partners across the world, that don't have that infrastructure, but want to be involved and can actually send samples to their closest hub, who can culture from their samples. And as I say, the ultimate goal is really that co-authorship, and every single microbe that is cultured will go into a culture collection, because it has to be open access for all. If there are any with sensitive IPs, etc., we will not progress them towards genome sequencing, etc. They can be kept back, I guess, until the IP credentials are known. And we will also exchange staff and students and use things like the Cliff grads to do that as well. So funding is under discussion. I do not want to jinx things at this point in time, but certainly things are looking quite positive that we may obtain some funding allowing us to really kickstart this flagship. But of course, I've got my fingers crossed on here, and I won't say any more about that. What I can say, though, is that Bill Kelly and myself had a conversation with the JGI last week, and they have agreed to open the Hungate Collection sequencing project. So initially they had agreed to sequence 1,000 rumen microbes, and they managed to do just over 400. So there were 600 slots left over that they have agreed to sequence them using the PacBio platform, and also to provide the supporting bioinformatics. I think next week I have a meeting with them again to know what data is required to accompany those microbes, and then I'll be sharing with everyone who has come forward and said that they have some novel microbes in their freezers that weren't part of the original Hungate collection sequencing. And then we can start to build up that spreadsheet to see what do we have already. In January next year, I'll also be submitting another project proposal to the JGI, so that we can take this, further, if you like. My aspirations are to really fill those gaps as much as we can. So let's see on that front. So I guess that is it, and hopefully I'm not over time, Richard.
Great, thank you very much, Sharon. That's really good. I mean, a really basic, fundamental science project, and illustrating the range of projects that that the GRA gets involved in, from fundamental science all the way through to sort of large scale applied work with industry. We've seen in the last 2 days that full range of activity, and as you say, in terms of opportunities for all countries to get involved in it, regardless of the infrastructure and the funding that's available there. There will be interest in having microbes coming from obscure locations and unusual diets in strange feeding situations in different parts of the world to contribute to the diversity, and also the outcomes of it eventually in increasing the application of the 16S based approaches, and using the cow pie type of approach to be able to use techniques that are a lower cost and more easy to do in more locations will be a benefit to understanding the communities and the functions of those communities in ruminants in all countries. So thank you very much for that. We need to there's a question I just noticed in the Q&A as I look there, about maintaining the strains. There's a couple of practical questions that you might have a look at and just respond to, about maintaining the strains, and also about sending materials between countries and the security. I think you could probably just answer.
Yeah, no
that's
problem.
Great. So
Thank you.
I'll move on and introduce the other flagship project that's very much in the livestock domain, around feed additives, and we'll get back David Yanis to speak about the feed additives flagship project.
Hello again, everyone. Hi, Richard.
Great.
Can you see the slides?
You're all good to go. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, so thank you very much. Yeah, I will spend the next 10 minutes presenting the main aspects of the flagship project on the technical guidelines to develop feed additives to reduce enteric methane, that we were fortunate to get it accepted by the council. I will start with the people already involved in the coordination. The flagship project is coordinated by myself and my colleague Andre Banning in the Netherlands, and Florencia Garcia from Argentina joined the team on the 1st of September. She's going to be working in the project for the next 2 years. We were also fortunate to get funding from the Global Dairy Platform and through the facilitation of the New Zealand Agricultural Greenhouse Gases Research Centre, and she's doing already a great job. You've got her email address there, as the main contact for any requests or questions on these flagship projects. We're also in conversations with other colleagues and countries to get support through the participation of PhD students. We had a CLEAF grad proposal accepted, and we are now going through the evaluation of the candidates, who the person is going to be also involved in some of the activities of the project, but also we are in conversations with colleagues from Ireland and Denmark to get support to potentially fund some activities through some PhD students, and also we have support from a new Horizon Europe project that I coordinate. The project is called Livestock. So just to give a bit of background, I don't think I need to spend much time to illustrate the interest in developing feed additives to reduce methane emissions is been increasing in the last years. In my previous talk, I mentioned one of our papers from the Feed and Nutrition Network by Claudia Arndt, in which among the different strategies analyzed, the one focusing on methane inhibitors was the one that showed the highest potential to reduce emissions. And in fact, if you go into any of the online searches like PubMed or Google Scholar and you type feed additives, methane emissions, or something like that, you get thousands of records. So a big body of literature and research effort. But despite this effort over the last decades, this has not been resulted in many additives that are available in the market. And there is a nice report also supported by the Global Research Alliance by Roger Hegarty and others on evaluating the evidence for efficacy and applicability of different methane inhibiting feed additives, which I recommend to read. And obviously the report is quite large, but this figure can summarize some of the outcomes. And the main outcome is that there are some feed additives that are nearly either in the market now or really to come into the market, but they're quite limited. Only 2 of them offer a methane reduction potential that we can consider high, so above 25%. The rest are either high or low, but there is still some issues to be solved around the confidence in efficacy or the applicability in different production systems, especially in grazing systems. So if you go through this report, you can come up with a few questions, 2 of them being, can we accelerate the development of feed additives to reduce methane? Further, that has been done in the last 10, 15 years. And for those who are now nearly coming into the market, how can we monitor and accurately account for the reductions achieved, which is one of the main concerns as well now in the industry to avoid greenwashing. So to answer these 2 questions is basically the main reason that we started to elaborate this project proposal, and the main objective is to facilitate the development and use of feed additives to reduce enteric methane emissions. There are 2 main specific objectives, 2 aspects to cover in the project. The main one is to provide to both the scientific community and the livestock sector technical guidelines on good practice on how to test, how to approach the testing and developing of feed additives. And that involves investigating different factors around the efficacy of additives of the different nature and how to test them in different production systems that involve different diets, different animals management systems, etc. And also how to investigate the mode of action of a range of additives, which is also part of the development of the additives. The second aspect is more related to things beyond the lab work or the field work, which is how to facilitate the registration process of feed additives. And here we need to consider the different regulatory contexts that we may find in different regions of the world. And as I said again before, how to account for the reductions achieved with these additives in different kind of inventories, either a national level, but also farm level or region level. So to start or to address these objectives, we are not starting from zero, and I showed some of these publications in my previous presentation. So in the Feed and Nutrition Network, which is the foundation of this GRA flagship, we have experience in providing guidelines in the in vitro work, in vivo work, how to work out the uncertainties and in the prediction models. So we're not starting from zero, but the question is that we haven't really approached the feed additives question in a holistic manner to cover all possible aspects to be considered, and that's why we're running this project. So we have like a different steps planned for the next 2 years. The first one is to define the structure and the sections of a technical guideline. So something very important to highlight here is that we are not aiming to do experimental work in this project. We want to provide best practice guidelines for the scientific and the industry and the livestock sector communities. But we are not going to run experiments, but we're going to use results from different experiments. So the first thing to do is to define what aspects are we going to cover and how we're going to structure that in the one or different documents that we're going to run. The aim and the commitment is to provide this structure and these different sections for the next COP27 in Egypt, so that can be presented as a plan for action for the next years. And Florencia is working in this structure, and she's been contacting many of the colleagues that have already show the interest to really get feedback, to try to have a common approach and agreed approach on the structure. Then once we have the sections defined, then we will allocate the contributions of different partners depending on the expertise. And I want to emphasize that this not only include FNM members, can include anyone who is interested, because as you will see later on, we need people covering a wide range of expertise. Then we will define working groups that will work separately, but in coordination, and Flor will be working in that kind of coordination through data gathering, processing, discussion, and writing the documents. And hopefully in less than 2 years' time, we can deliver the guidelines and hopefully also some scientific papers. So just very briefly, to illustrate how we intend to structure these guidelines, this is not obviously the final structure, just an initial plan that is being discussed. So we plan to have 2 blocks, one mostly directed to the experimental and the testing area, so the lab field work, and then the other one on the second objective more related to modeling, carbon accounting, implementation, etc. So the first block will have 3 chapters, and the second one around 2 chapters. In the first block, the first chapter will deal with the initial steps, and nowadays we have some technology available that we didn't have some years ago in terms of computational and modeling and in silico screening to identify different targets and also candidates to work on different areas of the methane production pathways, and we need to cover that. Of course, we will cover the use of different in vitro techniques, acknowledging that there's not going to be only one to use, but many others, not only batch culture, and we need to define the main aspects to consider when designing the experiments. And also the current technologies on molecular characterization of the different mixtures or extracts that we have available nowadays is also something to consider when it comes to the formulation of the different compounds. So this chapter will go around these issues. Then we will have a second one on testing at the second level, at the animal level, and it will cover aspects related to transforming doses from in vitro to in vivo, considering different aspects, how to design short and long-term in vivo experiments, but for dairy, beef, confined grazing systems, and considering the main statistical design aspects, so we can provide enough evidence at the end of the trial. Also, one of the options to consider is the early life intervention, so animals at the stage where the rumen is being developed, and many other aspects are still pending for some of the additives that I mentioned before in Roger Hegarty's report, such as delivery methods, persistency, animal health issues, etc. A third chapter will try to cover how to describe the mechanisms of action, so how to try to understand for those who are effective how they work. And this is something also very important when it comes to registering in some regulatory contexts in some countries. And there is a nice clear link here to the Rumen Microbial Genomics Network and the Culturomics flagship project. And Sharon mentioned that earlier. So the development of different techniques and the Culturomics approaches can be also very helpful in this chapter. We can also provide guidelines on how to explore the complementarity of feed additives with different mechanisms of action. I think there is a lack of activity in this area, and how to try to get the synergy of different additives that address the issue of reducing methane from different angles. And this is something that we very much would like to cover. So this is block 1, and then we move on to block 2. We go at a wider level in trying to assess the impact of the mitigation using these additives at farm level, but having a whole life cycle perspective and the whole value chain, and also considering cost assessment. So this is something that needs a different kind of expertise, but we think that is very much needed. And the last chapter will deal more with the regulatory context and how to facilitate the registration and what things need to be considered for this process. So we are aware of some regulatory aspects in some countries, but there are many variations throughout the world. So we really need the collaboration of people from many regions of the world, and that also involves different barriers for adoption of these feed additives in different areas with different regulatory aspects. So this chapter is going to be challenging, but we think that it's going to be also very much of a good use for the industry. So just to conclude, Richard, just a few words on that. The project was conceived to help both the academy and the industry sector. So we really want to not only to provide lab and field technical guidelines, but also go beyond that. It's quite ambitious and needs a wide range of expertise. So we really are open to bring more people on board. So if you are interested, please contact us. And we have already established links and collaboration with parallel initiatives in different parts of the world that are trying to develop similar guidelines. And that's the case of Cornell University, the Environmental Defense Fund, University California Davis in the US, Lindsay Consulting, and of course our collaboration with the Global Dairy Platform. So as I said, if you're interested, please contact us. This is Florencia's email address, and if you have any questions, I'll be very happy to answer them. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much, David. We're running right up against the end of time. There's sorry, not the end of time, but the end of our time. Abraham has a question about participating, so I think I'll just direct him to Florencia's email or to contact David to participate. There's a question from Olga about how long experiments have to run, and I think there are guidelines, for example, from EFSA about the minimum requirements, but that will be, I guess, looked at within the project. And there's a question maybe as Sinead is wrapping up, because we're on time. If you could have a look at David, have a look at the question from Sabine about the LCA part of the project and just answer in the Q&A on that one. I'll hand over to Sinead because we're eating into people's sleeping time now.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's a long day and we've had a really great day today. And I'd like to thank Richard for chairing most of the day and did a fantastic job in keeping to time just until now. But anyway, we can wrap up. So we started with Richard Tiffin on a really great presentation on bringing together big data sets. I think that was really valuable. And we learned new ways of looking at data and visualization, harmonizing data sets and unifying the language. And basically key messages included like there's no need for us to start from scratch to develop these data sets, that they can we use what we have and make them flexible, extendable data sets and adopt what we currently have. We moved then into the capability building and we had very interesting presentations from Tim Robinson from FAO, where he went through the GLEAM model development and implementation, and really that was excellent, and the global methane pledge, and looking at the role of FAO in pathways to dairy net zero. And then we had Siniro from Seeger, who's based at CIAT, and Majalinoa from Reforum. And really the key points in the interest of time is really, I suppose, they all mentioned the support from the GRA in bringing teams together and sharing expertise, and I suppose bridging gaps where there is a lack of expertise, that's where we can come in. And some of the key messages were that there's really too much competition for the existing funding. So funding is small and competition is fairly high for those. So really we need to work together in a coordinated fashion, particularly across those organizations involved in capability building. And while there is some funding from networks and also from public money from nets, etc., which is really valuable, we also need to tap into and engage more with private industry to support some of the initiatives and capability building projects. One of the things that came up that was interesting that we probably need to look at further is the language barriers that are emerging in some of these areas as well. We then had very successful update from the networks, and it was really great to see what they've done over the past year in their updates, coming from different activities, funding, papers, webinars, new projects, their social media presence, and of course our ability to meet together again. That's something new from this year after being apart during COVID, and really we're looking forward to meeting face to face, and even our own LRG meeting, which we can talk about tomorrow. For next year, we should really aim to have it face to face. Also really interesting to see the membership grow. We need to work with growing membership in the networks. It's great to see the animal health network really flourishing, and that's really great. And also interesting reports emerging like the FAO GRA report on the role of animal health, also the LEAP report. These are great reports that are coming out from the networks. We then had some very interesting updates from where the flagship projects have evolved, and really great progress in the last year from the culturomics and the feed additive flagships. And just to say, these are not just LRG flagships while they've emerged, these are GRA flagships and would welcome collaboration from across the GRA. So please get involved with Sharon and David if you have projects or if you have samples or if you're interested in these flagships. And great to see going from the GRA involved and the LRG involved in fundamental science, from the culturomics, and moving then into more applied from the feed additives, and the real comprehensive list of objectives and work packages that David has mentioned there, going right from the fundamental science, basic science, in vitro work, right through to registration and application on farms. So that's really interesting. So we might talk a little bit about tomorrow. I know we're running against time. So tomorrow I'm going to chair a 2-hour session essentially tomorrow, where we're going to work on our work plan for next year, and as part of that we're going to look at the plans from the networks. So we're going to give an opportunity for our network leads to talk through their plans, and we can try and build that into our work plan. So just without any, the other thing is the difference tomorrow as well is that we would like to get people's insight and people's opinions and thoughts on our work plan. So there will be a different setup in that you can actually all get involved. You can use your mic and your video to contribute to tomorrow's session. that's something new from today. We're moving from webinar to kind of a meeting session. So that you'll all be ready for that. So without further ado, I'd like to thank all our speakers today and for you for asking questions throughout the session, and thank Richard for chairing. So it's been a great meeting, and see you all tomorrow. Thank you very much.